My name is Jack L. Walters. I was in the United States Navy from 1945 to 1946. I volunteered when I was 17 and a half years old, and then I went into the Navy at Great Lakes, in Great Lakes, Illinois. And when I got out of the boot camp, I was on a train to Oakland, California, and I boarded the USS, what the heck was the name of that? I boarded a transport ship, and we were in an 11-ship convoy, and we proceeded to the Pacific Ocean, on the Pacific Ocean to where I heard off of Hawaii, Japan had surrendered to the United States government. And then I went on into the Philippines and went to an island called Mogmog, where all the ships of the fleet had gathered for the invasion of Japan. And we went on board, we went on the shore there and had 2 Cokes and a pack of cigarettes, and I didn't smoke, but I got the 2 packets of cigarettes anyhow. And then we went on into the Philippines and landed in Manila. Manila was pretty well bombed up when I got there, but then we went on to Tubaba Island, a receiving center. There they dispersed our 1,000 ship troops to the different places all over the Pacific, and I was made ship's company. I don't know why, but I was made ship's company, and I was a typist. I could type, I guess, is the reason. And so I typed, I did some typing there for about 2.5 to 3 months, and then they closed the base. And they said, you can go anywhere in the Pacific you want. Instead of me being smart and going to Japan or someplace like that, I picked Guam because there was an LST going home. I mean, a ship going home. And so I flew to Guam, and when I was in Guam, I stayed there 4 or 5 days before the ship arrived, and then I boarded an LST-247. And we, instead of going home to San Francisco like I thought we was going to do, they turned the ship around and said, we're going back to Saipan and Tinian. So we went to Saipan, and when we got there, we picked up war material off and loaded onto our LST, and took it to another island nearby. I forget the name of the island. I think it was Tinian, if I remember right. And they dumped them all into the ocean. Took it from one island to another to dump it into the ocean. And then we did that 2 or 3 times. And then we proceeded on to the Hawaiian Islands, and I was on board that ship for probably 4 months, and then we proceeded on to the United States, and I was discharged after 1 year and 5 months. I got sunburned one day, and I said, I told the officer, I can't handle this sun, being out here chipping decks, and he said, well, go in and help the cook. We pulled into Pearl Harbor 2 days later, and I'm sitting there peeling potatoes. That's all I know how to do, is peel potatoes. And the captain had been on Liberty. He came back off of Liberty, and he said to me, he came down to the galley where I was sitting there peeling potatoes. He said, I just got orders to go back to Saipan and Tinian, and I can't leave the harbor without a rated cook aboard. And he pointed to the stove and said, what's that? I said, that's the stove. He says, you're now the 3rd-class cook in charge of this galley. And 2 hours later, we were underway, and I had to prepare an evening meal. And I didn't even know how to turn the stove on. We were in Saipan, I think it was, and when the first time we went, there was a fire. Somebody fired a shot over there on the island, and one of our people came back on a motorcycle that said he got shot. The shot was by somebody, and then he drove that motorcycle. He was so nervous he drove that motorcycle into the ocean. When I was in the Philippines, one day I was looking up, and there was a little Philippine village real close to our base, and I'm sitting there, and as I look up, and there's this little boy walking down this dirt road, pulling the head of a Japanese soldier like you would pull a ball or a roller. They had it on a wire, and the wires through the head of the Jap soldier head, and he was pulling it as a toy, I guess. And then the brutality of it. Anyhow, that was one incident that I can recall that was unusual. I think we were headed for the island, and it was a troop ship that we were on. Well, there was 1,000 men on board ship. I kind of think we were headed for Japan for the invasion. Truman dropped that bomb and saved my butt, I think, but I can't really say that it's a truism. Yeah, 1945. Well, I think when I was when we pulled into the Pearl Harbor, it was I wasn't there but a short while, but anyhow, I don't really have any vivid memory of it, except it was I did see the Arizona from a distance as it laid in its, where the Arizona was, we were, you could see a little bit of it sticking up out of the water. I didn't know that there was how many men there was in the ship and are entombed in the ship at the time. So I really had no impression of tragedy about it. It was just a sight at that time that I saw, and I really wasn't smart enough to realize what really happened at that moment in time, and it was awful. Then it all hit me, yeah, what a terrible thing it was, and underneath that ship was men still there. It's just awful, but it's a very impressive sight, very impressive. The only thing I can tell you about my experiences in Hawaii was that I was confined more or less to the ship because I didn't have any shoes. I had my paycheck hadn't caught up with me, and I didn't have any dress shoes, so I couldn't go on board. I couldn't go ashore. World War II was culminated in the world as a monstrous thing. It happened to the Nazis were monsters, and they needed to be defeated. The Japanese surprised us with their attack on the United States, and it was a violent era right at that time, and people were naive in my part of the world about the history of those countries and what was going on in the world. Actually, we were little towns in Kansas where you don't really know much about what's going on in the world, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a war, and it's the brutality, and you read about what the Japanese and the Germans did, about the monstrous things they did, and the war, the way the war carried on for years. It was just overwhelming. All I knew, I wanted to go over and avenge this military monstrous Nazis and Japanese. That's all I knew that I wanted to do, is defend my country.